Happy Tuesday, everyone. We'll just wait a few minutes here to let more people join. Looks like we have a bunch filtering in. Perfect. Give it another minute or so, let a few more people come in. And as you see in the chat there, yes, the webinar will be recorded today. Um, we also would ask that you use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask any questions throughout the presentation. And then towards the end, we'll open up Q&A time so we can answer those questions. Looks like our participant list here has stabilized, so we can get started. All right. Well, thank you all for joining today. Today, we want to talk about attack paths and the Bloodhound way. So let me get my screen shared out here. So yeah, we want to go over um, really identity-based attack paths. We want to look at the BloodHound approach, and then we'll also see a demo of BloodHound Enterprise. All right, so quick about me. I'm Sergio Gonzalez. I'm a senior sales engineer. I've spent 20 plus years in IT, mostly in systems engineering. I've administered Active Directory for lots of different organizations, internet service providers, the Wyoming State Supreme Court, and businesses large and small while working at an MSP. And then more recently, I transitioned into sales engineering with a focus on cybersecurity. I also want to highlight SpecterOps quickly. So SpecterOps is a consulting services organization, really leaders in offensive security, the organization that brought red team exercises into the commercial market with a deep offensive security and adversarial tradecraft background. SpecterOps also offers program development, private and public training, a range of assessments like pen test, red team, purple team, and maturity assessments. And as a part of our consulting services roots, we've authored over 90 open source projects, including Bloodhound Community Edition. And then more recently, we also authored BloodHound Enterprise, which we'll be talking about today. One of the reasons we created BloodHound Enterprise was we really wanted to help our customers beyond just red team assessments and pen tests. We were tired of this cycle that we found ourselves in with our red team and pen test customers. We'd perform an assessment, we'd hand over results, the company would mull over findings, they would fix some, none, or all, and we'd repeat the cycle next year. And meanwhile, attackers are continuing to abuse identity. The industry has seen a rise in identity exploitation, and we decided it was time for a new approach. SpectreOps actually attempted to use BloodHound open source as a preventative approach. I mean, we have this tool, we created it for red teamers. It shows us attack paths and identity. And we really tried to make it work to show us every attack path in the environment, but really it was designed to be a red team tool, and we just couldn't make it work for for blue teams or defenders. So we built BloodHound Enterprise. And attackers keep abusing identity so much because identity attack paths exist everywhere, and because defenders don't see identity-based attack paths the same way attackers do. We know this because we think like attackers, because we use and teach the tools of their craft. That's what we do. And we firmly believe that as long as the industry doesn't think like attackers and see what they see, the problem is still going to persist. And really, what is the identity backbone today? It's Active Directory, and with growing numbers, Entra ID. But if you look at AD, you've got, decades of configurations in your domain. You've got multiple generations of Active Directory admins, all with their own a way of doing things, implementing best practices that were current for their time. You've got mergers and acquisitions, adding complexity uh, to your domains. You've got on-prem AD and migrations into Azure and the hybrid complexity, and buried and often temporary permissions that just never get removed. And you've got all of this technical debt that just amasses over time, and with no great tool to audit and find these problems, these configurations that result in overprivilege or really what I guess people would consider some sort of misconfiguration. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about users needing access to more and more resources, and each of those resources requires varying levels of access for a user to do their job. And so this is really what the interconnectivity of users to their resources looks like. We don't just have one user, we've got multiple users. And when we zoom out and take a look at a domain, uh, and look at all of their interconnected relationships, this is what we see. There's a complex web of relationships, an interconnectedness of identity and resources, users and privileges that it's virtually impossible to keep track of and audit. And this interconnectedness is what really creates a playground for attackers. So really what we're talking about is identity attack paths. An identity attack path is just the abuse of these privileges and relationships to go from a non-privileged user computer to a target, usually a domain admin. And we're not talking about exploits here or vulnerabilities. Really, the moment an attacker lands, they might already have permissions to take over. The path could already be there. So once they take over an identity, they're not really exploiting anything that was necessarily a mistake either. And on top of that, attackers have a lot of different ways to get to their objective, a lot of different paths because of the interconnectedness. In a domain, we could have hundreds of thousands to millions of attack paths in a single domain. In our experience, finding an attack path is guaranteed. In our BloodHound Enterprise audits, we always find attack paths. I myself, when I'm running proof of concepts for our customers, I have yet to find an environment that was free of attack paths. It was totally clean. There's always an abundance of attack paths, and it really goes back to what we were talking about, the decades of technical debt, the constant changes that go on in Active Directory. So, how are identity and security teams trying to control this today? A lot of teams are looking at, implementing identity management or a tiering system, hygiene best practices, and those, are recommended by everyone. But a lot of times, you know, these things are really hard to implement. They're hard to audit and keep clean. And so while yes, like everybody recommends you implement these best practices, at the end of the day, once you do, you don't really have a great way of knowing that you've audited or of tiered out your domain perfectly, that kind of thing. We also, in the industry, will deploy tools that are looking at misconfigurations, and those tools are really great at surfacing just that, misconfigurations, but it's doing it for absolutely every user. There's a lot of times no good prioritization on, hey, is this configuration worse than another one? And you're really left with a mountain of alerts and a kind of a where do I start type of feeling. And we also see detection and response as really a necessary reactive control. This is really there because we're trying to treat the symptoms of everything that's going on in Active Directory, all the misconfigurations, the attack paths that we know that are there. We need something that is going to help react to those things. But we also find that it's really hard to detect what's admin behavior, standard user behavior, or attacker behavior. So a lot of teams get really inundated in alerts. And again, there's no great prioritization on, hey, what's the worst thing that we have to work on? How do we prioritize that? Where should we go from here? So, every one of these tools has a purpose. It really is something good that we should implement. But at the end of the day, we're treating a lot of the symptoms. So we want to look at a new approach to reducing overall identity risk in your environment. Really, you need the right tool. And BloodHound Enterprise is the first of its kind identity attack path management platform. And really, BloodHound Enterprise starts with identifying your most critical identities and resources in Active Directory and Intra ID. It maps every attack path continuously through every privilege, through every relationship. Uh, it will then go and identify choke points or configurations shared by multiple attack paths, with the idea being that we can remediate a choke point, drop risk rather than focusing on each individual path that may exist. BloodHound Enterprise will also quantify exposure. So this is kind of going to prioritizations. How do we help teams prioritize which attack paths to tackle first? And in BloodHound Enterprise, we look at exposure as the percentage of users and computers that could leverage a path. So when we're handing these things over to infrastructure teams or AD teams to remediate, really want them focusing on a choke point that is going to reduce the most amount of risk for the least amount of changes. And Bloodhound will also provide practical remediation guidance within the tool so that we can really reduce the time needed to research a fix and find the latest best practice. So the idea is not only are we finding all of the attack paths in the environment continuously, prioritizing those for the team, showing the exposure, but also providing remediation guidance so we can just get to fixing these things. And along the way, Bloodhound Enterprise is going to keep track of the overall risk in your environment and report on how well you're doing over time removing risk. So as we drop off a large path, we want to see that risk get reduced in the environment. Yeah, actually, let's take a look in Bloodhound Enterprise. and see what this all looks like. Swap my share here. Okay, so let's actually get started taking a look at BloodHound as maybe some of you out there are probably familiar with BloodHound more on the open source side of things. So this would be a very familiar screen. And the open source BloodHound, again, was the first tool that came out trying to identify attack paths. It was designed for red teamers and is really good at helping red teamers find what is my shortest path from something to something. And so red teamers usually start with, hey, let's see how I can get from domain users to domain admins, for instance. And here we see there's a path in this environment. So again, this is great at finding a path. We, in just a few seconds, we're able to say, hey, how do I get from A to B? And we've got a path. But one thing that the Bloodhound Community Edition um, doesn't really help defenders on is how do I prioritize this? Where should I start making fixes in this chain? Is there something worse here that I need to look at? And then once we make a fix, and are there any other paths there that are potentially hidden? So if we remove maybe some sessions, okay, we've dropped off a path, but there was a path behind it. And we go through and maybe we remove another path. Let's see if I find that one here. Like admin 2. And we've got another path right behind it. And this one is Active Directory Certificate Services. So Bloodhound Community Edition will give us the shortest path, but it unfortunately hides all of the paths behind it. As a red teamer, this is a perfect tool because I can really use it like Google Maps to get from point A to point B. I can get rerouted if a path goes away, and it'll just keep showing me the shortest path to my objective. But this is not a really sustainable process for a team that wants to proactively go find every attack path in their Active Directory to reduce the overall risk. And so that's where BloodHound Enterprise came in. That's where we had to really rewrite the whole BloodHound product to help defenders do their jobs. And so, as we saw in the slides, the platform goes out and will automatically categorize the domain admins in the environment or highly privileged users because of group membership. And it'll look at SID and group membership to categorize those. It'll find the built-in groups that have, uh, higher privilege. So your enterprise admins, schema admins, anything nested under your domain admins, that kind of thing, or nested in these groups. It'll also go out and identify group policy objects that can touch those critical assets. So the domain controllers and domain admins. And from there, we'll go through and identify all of the attack paths in the environment so that you don't have to do the onesie, twosie searching. It'll come out with a list of every attack path that it finds. It'll bucketize these lists on type. It goes out and assigns a priority to every one of these attack paths. And that priority is based on exposure. So when we look at this critical path here, we see that authenticated users can leverage Active Directory certificate services. The product will go out and give us a description so we don't have to have red teamer skills to understand what this attack path really is. We can go in and see how long this attack path has been here since this platform is doing continuous scanning. We can also see the exposure here, and we're seeing 96% exposure, which an attacker could drop in anywhere in the environment at 96% exposure and have this path to really easily abuse. And if we look at this, we see authenticated users here is involved in this path. So that really correlates to every user in the environment, or 98% of the environment can abuse this path. In BloodHound Enterprise, we also want to show remediation actions, so remediation guidance. We'll give a quick blurb here. We also allow kind of this expansion out to seeing the whole remediation plan. Screenshots involved. How do we approach this? How do we start to remediate this within the standard AD tools? What other reference information do we need to know? Maybe how attackers can abuse this attack, MITRE references, all of that here at your fingertips, so that, again, this doesn't become a research project to find out, why is this path bad? Why is this worse than another one? We really want to highlight the worst paths, all the paths you need to remediate, how to remediate it, and how to find information in the platform. If we take a look at this finding here, we can also go in and explore it. So this is going to give us a view into the relationships from authenticated users to the domain. And really, we want to see things like, hey, uh, you know, what are all the local admin privileges that authenticated users have in the domain? Or what's my outbound object control, so we can understand really how terrible this is. There's a lot of great things that we can see just by expanding this out, starting to pull those threads. We can see really how bad, having authenticated users with this attack path is. We can see lots of things like breaks in least privilege or tiering, where we've got non-domain admins logging into boxes they shouldn't. So it's all about peeling the information apart, understanding the relationships, and having all of this information at your fingertips. If we go back and take a look at the attack path itself with Active Directory Certificate Services. Active Directory Certificate Services is a new attack path that SpectreOps has added to BloodHound open source, BloodHound Enterprise, and it's finding attack paths within Active Directory Certificate Services. We know of 14 or so of those, and one of the things we want to highlight is, again, the relationships in these attack paths. And with our research in Active Directory Certificate Services, we found that this is really very complex. It's very hard to map this out in an Excel type of thing to say, hey, how would a user get to the domain leveraging Active Directory Certificate Services to abuse that? How do you get there? We wanted to be able to show all of the relationships in here, everything that's involved. So when a infrastructure team or AD team or PKI team comes in to remediate this, we know all the players involved here. And within the attack paths page, we also have remediation actions on where to go next. What do we start looking for? And, we had talked a bit about choke points in the slides. And one way we can actually show choke points in the platform is through this graph here. And what we can see is that we've got a lot of attack paths, but if we zoom in and take a look at this choke point, this admin 2, we get an information on it. We've got unprivileged users with the ability, or I guess admin privileges on a box. From the naming convention, we can see it's a domain controller. So we see that the everyone group has admin rights over the domain controller. We've got authenticated users over the domain controller. And we've got tier 2 support, which breaks our tiering model. Tier 2 support shouldn't have admin privileges on a domain controller that is considered tier 0. And so if we go through and clean these things up, we actually can drop off all of the attack paths below it. So this is where we get to the notion of choke points and making the least amount of changes for the most amount of risk reduction. So everything within BloodHound is designed to, bring this information to your fingertips, give you a priority on what we should be fixing first, how we should be fixing it, and helping us along the way with reducing the amount of fixes. We also talked a bit about reporting or metrics. So BloodHound Enterprise, through its continuous scanning, is always keeping track of the overall exposure, and this directly correlates to risk. And we want to see this risk, dropping over time. So in this demo environment, we don't really clean anything up, so we've always got 97% risk. But in our customers' environments, we generally see in the first 30 days of using the product, they can really knock out 30% risk in those first 30 days. And that's really by going through and identifying quick wins, large default groups that shouldn't be there, or the previous one that we looked at, the everyone group on a domain controller. Pretty easy thing to nuke and add the proper groups or domain admins to this and really start reducing that risk. So in the posture page, this is going to keep track of really the fruits of your labors. So as the team is going through and making remediation fixes, we want to track that over time, and we want to see attack paths disappearing. So we show that by green. We've got a negative number here. We've reduced some Kerberos delegation. Anything in red would be an addition to these attack paths. So in these environments, these things ebb and flow. We see infrastructure teams needing to add new privileges and resources. And with something like BloodHound Enterprise continuously scanning, we can pick up if a new attack path shows up and we're adding paths. And that really helps infrastructure teams kind of knock these attack paths out right away instead of a year from now when this becomes production, kind of a live configuration that now requires lots of change management, after hours work, maintenance windows, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of good that we can do by continuously scanning, reducing the overall risk, but also maintaining a clean environment after we've gone through and remediated these findings. So that was really the highlight I wanted to dig into on BloodHound Enterprise, kind of the quick demo of the platform based off of some of the concepts we were talking about. And now I'd like to open it up to you all for Q&A. Ryan, do we have any questions? Looks like you got some answered.
We had a couple, but they were pretty straightforward, so I just answered them.
Perfect. See if we get any other questions here. But I know after the webinar, we'll send out a follow-up with the recording, necessary, or all of the relevant links, link to see maybe a more tailored demo. You can integrate the product with SIM or SOAR. All that's available through the API. We do have a Splunk integration today and an Azure Sentinel integration. And we got a question, when drilling down into the nodes, is there a better way to expand or drill into the combo nodes? In this interface was designed more to give you the overall findings, and you would actually explore the findings through each one of the principles, because each one of them can be different. There's lots of different relationships. In maybe an updated UI interface, we'll have a little bit different ways to show you this information that'll expand out on, you know, kind of kind of what you're looking for, which is expanding out the combo nodes. But today you would actually do that through each of these principles. All right. Well, that looks like I don't see any other questions popping up. So it looks like we'll be able to give some people some time back. Maybe they can get some lunch. Thank you all for attending today. Like I said, we'll send some follow-ups, links, some of the information that we covered here today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your Tuesday.